Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're jumping right in to empower you by breaking down the science of the 5 most dangerous foods for toddlers. We're going to look really closely at exactly why certain foods pose such a massive risk to young kids, and more importantly, how a few incredibly simple, quick adjustments can make mealtime completely safe. Okay, let's kick things off by challenging a super common but honestly quite dangerous assumption a lot of parents have. If you were sitting across the room, or maybe you're in the kitchen while your toddler is snacking in the living room, would you hear them if they started to choke? Most of us intuitively think, of course I would. I'd hear coughing or sputtering, right? Well, pediatric emergency room doctors will tell you it is the exact opposite. Here is the terrifying reality. In roughly 80% of choking cases involving children under 4, the whole thing is completely silent. Why? Because the airway is entirely sealed off. There is literally no air passing through to make a single sound. A lot of times, parents only realize what's happening when the child just stops responding. And that's exactly why over 12,000 kids end up in U.S. emergency rooms every single year for food-related choking. So, here is our roadmap for this explainer. We're covering the vulnerable anatomy, the 5 deadliest foods, hidden dangers like pathogens and salt, the safe cut solution, and finally, a 60-second emergency action plan. All right, let's start from the ground up with Section 1, the vulnerable anatomy. Just take a look at this danger zone. A toddler's airway is literally half the width of yours. We're talking just 9 to 10 millimeters wide, whereas an adult's is about 17 to 20 millimeters. So foods that you and I would swallow without a second thought can form a perfect airtight seal in a child's trachea. To put that into perspective, that 9 to 10 millimeter width means a standard coin-cut slice of a hot dog is the exact diameter of their windpipe. And, it's not just about that tiny airway. Think about how we chew. Without molars to grind up fibrous foods, and remember, those don't fully erupt until a kid is 24 to 30 months old, young children physically cannot break down hard or round foods. Throw in the fact that their immune systems are still developing and their kidneys just aren't ready to process high amounts of salt, their bodies simply are not equipped to handle adult foods as is. So that whole, oh, it looks small enough logic a lot of us use, it completely ignores both their anatomy and the specific texture of the food. If you want to rethink what small enough actually means in a very real way, you have to try this practical test at home. It's called the toilet paper roll test. Basically, if a piece of food can pass through an empty cardboard toilet paper tube, it is still too big and poses a hazard for any child under 4. It really takes that geometric risk and puts it right into perspective for us, doesn't it? Moving right along, let's look at Section 2, the 5 deadliest choking hazards. Believe it or not, just 4 textures cause 95% of food choking incidents. This proves that the geometry and texture of the food matter way more than just its weight. Round foods can pop in and form an airtight seal. Slick foods like grapes or whole nuts, they can slide right past the tongue before the chewing reflex even has a chance to kick in. Hard foods like raw carrots are impossible to grind down without those missing molars. And sticky foods, like heavy globs of peanut butter, can literally act like glue and adhere to the airway wall. Now, when you look at the data, these 5 foods account for the vast majority of pediatric choking deaths and hospital visits in the US. And it makes sense, right? Every single one of these combines one of those high-risk textures we just talked about with a shape that perfectly matches a toddler's narrow airway. And sitting right at the absolute top of that list are hot dogs. The cylindrical shape and that sort of rubbery skin form a perfect, deadly plug in a kid's trachea. They are responsible for a staggering 17% of all food-related choking deaths in children under 10. Because the texture is so springy and compressible, if it gets wedged into that 9 millimeter space, it conforms right to the walls of the airway. That makes it incredibly difficult to dislodge. Okay, let's pivot a bit to Section 3, hidden dangers. We're talking pathogens and salt. So going back to processed meats like hot dogs, sausages, and bacon for a second. Yes, they offer some protein, but they really lack the nutritional punch of minimally processed alternatives like beans, fish, and eggs. More importantly, they bring along harmful preservatives, specifically added nitrates and nitrates. Now, these can occur naturally, sure, but when they're added in high amounts as preservatives, they're really not recommended for young, developing bodies. And then we have to talk about the salt. 2 grams. That number represents the absolute maximum daily salt intake for a toddler between 1 and 3 years old. Why so low? Because their developing kidneys just cannot handle highly salted processed meats. To put that in perspective, in the UK, processed meat makes up nearly 6% of the total dietary energy intake for toddlers, which brings a massive wave of sodium with it. Diets that are super high in salt at this age can actually alter their taste preferences long term and set them up for high blood pressure way down the line. Also, because toddlers are so little, it takes a much smaller amount of a pathogen to make them really sick. Their immune systems are basically still in training, which is exactly why they have to avoid certain raw or unpasteurized foods altogether. For instance, unpasteurized soft cheeses like brie can harbor listeria. Honey, which is in almost every pantry, can contain botulinum spores that produce toxins in a baby's intestines, leading to infant botulism. That is exactly why honey is an absolute no-go before age 1. And raw shellfish? Way too much risk for severe food poisoning. All right, let's get into the solutions. Section 4, the Safe Cut solution. This is where you have the power. By spending literally 30 seconds modifying the geometry of these foods, changing them from round to flat or sticky to thin, you drastically drop the risk of an airtight seal. Never serve a hot dog in coin cuts. Quarter it lengthwise into long, thin strips instead. Same exact rule for grapes and cherry tomatoes. A whole grape is a huge danger, but even a halved grape is unsafe because it still has that cup shape that can cap off an airway. You've got to quarter them lengthwise to expose the soft inside. String cheese? Pull it or slice it lengthwise into thin strips, never round chunks. And peanut butter should never just be handed over as a thick glob on a spoon. Thin it out and spread it lightly on some bread. Let's move to our final and most critical section. Section 5, Emergency Action in 60 Seconds. If you take away anything today, please let it be this distinction. Gagging is loud and it is protective. If your kid is sputtering, coughing, getting red in the face, and making noise, their body is doing exactly what it's built to do to clear a partial blockage. Let it run its course. But silent choking means there is zero airflow. If they go totally silent, their face changes color, and there's no air movement, that is a full obstruction and you must act immediately. I need you to burn this 4-step sequence into your memory. If your child is silent and can't breathe, do not wait to call for help before you start taking physical action. First, assess. Look for that silence. Second, act. If they're under a year old, alternate 5 back blows and 5 chest thrusts. Over 1 year, begin abdominal thrusts, which most of us know as the Heimlich maneuver. Third, and this is so crucial, dial 911 immediately. Shout for someone else to do it or just throw your phone on speaker. Don't wait to see if the back blows work first. And finally, continue. Do not stop those life-saving actions until the object is completely dislodged or the paramedics walk through the door. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with this question to chew on. Are 30 seconds of cutting worth a lifetime of peace of mind? Because understanding their anatomy and just slightly changing the geometry of their food is literally the most powerful tool you have at the dinner table. When we stop looking at toddler food through an adult lens and actually respect the physics of their developing bodies, we can prevent the vast majority of these terrifying incidents. Stay safe, stay prepared, and seriously, take those extra 30 seconds.